The stars shone silently over the empty planet. Earth had changed. Cities that once bustled with life now lay in quiet ruins. Forests slowly reclaimed roads and buildings, and rivers flowed freely without bridges to block them. No human voice could be heard. No engines roared across the land. Only the wind whispered through the trees. In orbit above the planet, a small probe named Arden floated quietly. Its metal body reflected the sunlight, and its sensors scanned the surface below. Arden had been asleep for centuries, drifting in space, waiting for a moment that would never come. Then, a small surge of power woke it. Its systems blinked on one by one. Memory banks activated. The probe had a mission, even if no one remained to watch. Arden's main purpose was simple but important. It carried the final message of humanity, a warning to the galaxy. The message was recorded long ago by humans who understood that one day, others would hear it. It was a message of truth, courage, and warning. Humans had faced great dangers, and they wanted other civilizations to understand the power of choice. As the probe adjusted its course, it activated its long-range transmitters. The message began to spread across the galaxy. Light and sound carried words that had never been sent before. In faraway star systems, aliens detected it. The words were clear, firm, and full of strength. The message said, "You made this choice. Now face the consequences." No one knew what it meant at first. Many alien civilizations paused, curious and cautious. Some thought humans had been foolish. How could a planet so small warn the galaxy? Others remembered old stories about humans. They were clever, inventive, and sometimes stubborn. Even after they vanished, humans had a way of leaving traces that others could not ignore. Far away, on the planet Nero, a young alien named Talon sat in a study filled with screens and data panels. He was a researcher, always curious about the stars. When he detected the Earth message, his eyes widened. He had read about humans in old archives, but he had never seen anything like this. The tone was firm, almost like a teacher speaking to a class that had forgotten its lessons. Why would they send this? Talon whispered to himself. His elders had always said that humans were gone and that studying them was pointless. Yet the message was different. It carried a strength and certainty that made him feel small. He decided to investigate. Talon began collecting every fragment of data about Earth he could find. Old maps, records of human technology, and stories from other civilizations slowly formed a picture of a people who were gone but not forgotten. Meanwhile, the probe Arden moved through space with quiet determination. Its path was precise, guided by programs created long ago. It did not speak or argue. It only carried the message. Deep inside its memory, it stored videos, words, and images of Earth as it had been before humans disappeared. Forests, oceans, mountains, and cities all glowed with memories of life. Most importantly, it stored the voice of Myra, a human who had spoken directly to the galaxy. Her words were strong but simple. She had warned of greed, carelessness, and cruelty. She had asked others to consider their actions carefully. As the message reached more star systems, different reactions appeared. Some civilizations ignored it, thinking it was old data with no meaning. Others panicked, worried that humans had left traps or technology behind. A few listened carefully, their leaders questioning decisions made long ago. Could they have avoided mistakes if they had listened to warnings like this? Talon felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. The message was powerful, but it was more than that. It was a test. The humans had vanished, yet their voice reached across light years, asking everyone to think, decide, and take responsibility. Talon realized that the probe was not just a machine. It was the last ambassador of a species that had understood the importance of courage, intelligence, and wisdom. As Earth slowly turned beneath Arden, Talon made a promise to himself. He would follow the message, study it carefully, and share it with others. Humans were gone, but they had left a gift. It was not wealth, weapons, or machines. It was knowledge, courage, and the warning that every choice mattered. The stars were bright, the galaxy was wide, and one small message traveled silently but powerfully. From a planet no longer inhabited by humans, a warning echoed across the stars. The words were simple, the tone firm, and the meaning clear. The galaxy would have to listen, and one day, everyone would understand the choice they had made. Arden floated silently, carrying humanity's last word. The journey had begun, and the galaxy was about to face the consequences. Talon could not stop thinking about the message from Earth. Its words echoed in his mind like a strong drum beat. You made this choice. Now face the consequences. The words were short, but they carried a weight he had never felt before. He wanted to understand why humans had sent it and what it meant for the galaxy. Talon's laboratory was quiet, but his screens glowed with data from star systems far away. He began gathering information about human history, studying records stored in old galactic archives. Humans had been small in number, but their impact was large. They had built cities, machines, and ships that could cross the stars. They had faced dangers that could have destroyed them many times over, yet they had always found a way to survive. As he read, Talon discovered something unexpected. Humans had not only built machines for exploration but also for defense. They had studied other civilizations, understanding how choices could lead to peace or destruction. Talon realized that the message he had received was not just a warning. It was a test. Humans wanted others to think about their decisions, to see if they could act wisely. The young researcher decided to share his discovery with a few trusted colleagues. They were cautious, but curiosity won over fear. Together, they studied the recordings sent by Arden, the probe carrying Earth's last message. Talon showed them the voice of Myra, a human who had spoken directly to the galaxy. Myra had been clear and strong. She had warned other civilizations about greed, carelessness, and the dangers of ignoring consequences. Her words felt alive, even though she had not lived for many centuries. Some of Talon's colleagues were skeptical. They asked why humans, a species long gone, should matter now. Others began to see the patterns in their own history, noticing mistakes their civilizations had made. Slowly, a few began to understand the importance of the message. Humans, even in absence, had a way of teaching that went beyond words or weapons. They taught by example, showing courage, intelligence, and wisdom. Talon spent many nights studying the message. He compared human technology to alien technology and found that humans had been creative in ways no one had expected. Their machines were simple but effective. Their ships could move through space with speed and efficiency. Most importantly, humans had built systems to store knowledge, to remind themselves and others of lessons learned from past mistakes. While Talon worked, news of Earth's message spread across nearby star systems. Some civilizations became anxious. Leaders worried about the meaning of the warning. Others were curious and sent ships to investigate. They wanted to understand why a species that no longer existed had left such a strong message. Slowly, the galaxy began to pay attention. Talon realized that humans had not disappeared completely. They had left behind something more important than themselves. They had left ideas. They had left courage. They had left a reminder that every choice mattered. It was not a threat, but a challenge. The galaxy had to prove it could act wisely. One evening, Talon watched the stars from his laboratory window. He imagined Earth long ago, full of life, full of sound. Humans had looked at the sky and wondered what was beyond their planet. They had hoped that one day, their voice would reach the stars. And now, centuries later, it had. Their message was traveling across space, touching the minds of others who had never even met them. Talon felt a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that civilizations could learn from humans, and fear that they might not. The message was simple but powerful. It demanded reflection. It asked the galaxy to think about decisions, responsibility, and the future. Talon knew that understanding the message was only the first step. The real challenge was convincing others to listen. He continued his research tirelessly. Each night, he reviewed old maps, studied star charts, and watched the data from Arden. The probe traveled silently, carrying Earth's warning to places no one had ever seen. Its mission was not just to move through space, but to awaken the galaxy to the importance of choices. As days turned into weeks, more scholars and leaders began to take notice of Talon's work. They listened to the recordings, read the data, and felt the meaning of the message. Some were inspired, seeing humans as a species that had understood the weight of responsibility. Others were nervous, realizing that ignoring the message could have consequences they were not ready for. Talon smiled quietly to himself. Humans were gone, but they had not left the galaxy empty-handed. Their spirit traveled in the probe, in the words of Myra, and in the lesson that every choice carried power. The message was no longer just for Talon. It was for everyone who had the courage to listen. The stars stretched endlessly above him. Somewhere in the distance, Arden moved silently, carrying the last voice of humanity. The galaxy was beginning to pay attention, and for the first time in centuries, humans were not forgotten. Talon could not stop thinking about Earth. The message had reached the galaxy, but he wanted to know more. What had humans done before they disappeared? How had they left behind a warning so powerful that it could still inspire fear and respect centuries later? He began searching for additional data hidden in old galactic archives. Many records were fragmented or damaged, but some remained intact. Among the files, he discovered details about human projects that no one had ever fully understood. Humans had built machines capable of protecting entire star systems. They had developed technology to detect threats long before they arrived. These were not weapons of destruction. They were tools of protection and knowledge. One recording stood out among the rest. It featured a human named Myra, speaking directly to the galaxy. She explained that humans had faced dangers from both within and outside their world. She spoke of cooperation, intelligence, and courage. Myra's voice was calm but firm, and Talon could feel her determination. Her words emphasized fairness, warning, and hope. Even after centuries, the power of her voice seemed to fill the room. Talon realized that humans had not acted alone. They had worked with others who believed in the same ideals. Many of these allies were now forgotten or gone, but their work remained. Talon studied blueprints of ships, energy shields, and data archives that humans had left behind. Each design reflected careful thought, careful planning, and a deep understanding of consequence. Humans had wanted to give the galaxy a chance to act wisely. The more Talon learned, the more inspired he became. He imagined humans traveling across space, not seeking conquest, but seeking understanding. They had reached out to other civilizations, building alliances and sharing knowledge. Even when humans faced challenges, they had refused to surrender to fear. Their resilience amazed Talon. One day, Talon shared his discoveries with a council of scholars. He explained how humans had created systems to store knowledge and protect it for the future. He showed them recordings of Myra and others who had spoken of courage, wisdom, and accountability. Some scholars were skeptical at first. They thought humans were gone and had no influence over the galaxy anymore. But the evidence was undeniable. Humans had left behind not just warnings, but tools and lessons for anyone willing to learn. The council began to understand. They realized that humans had acted with thought and purpose. They had believed in the potential of the galaxy to do better, to make wise choices. Even in absence, humans had found a way to guide others. Talon could feel their respect growing. This was more than history. It was a message that could change the way civilizations thought about responsibility and cooperation. Talon decided to follow the path of the humans. He began visiting planets that had once been connected to Earth. Some planets had ruins of old research stations or small satellites left behind. On these worlds, he found inscriptions and data logs that mirrored the messages in Arden's recordings. The words were simple: think, decide, own it. They reminded him that choices were never without consequence. Humans had believed in the strength of their ideals, and they had trusted others to act with care. The galaxy began to notice the influence of Talon's work. Scholars, explorers, and leaders from distant star systems came to study the records. They watched the recordings of Myra and learned from human ingenuity. Slowly, fear began to turn into admiration. The message of Earth was no longer just a warning. It was a source of guidance. Talon could see the change happening. Conflicts that seemed unavoidable started to be reconsidered. Leaders who had once been proud and careless began to think before acting. They remembered the warning from a long-lost species and realized that humans had faced challenges even greater than theirs. If humans could act wisely despite danger, then so could they. As Talon continued his work, he often returned to the recordings of Myra. He listened to her voice as if she were speaking directly to him. He imagined humans standing together, facing uncertainty and making the right choices despite fear. He understood now that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy was not power or technology. It was guidance, courage, and the reminder that wisdom mattered more than strength. In the quiet of his laboratory, Talon made a promise. He would carry forward the message of Earth. He would share the lessons humans had left behind. The galaxy could learn from their courage, their thoughtfulness, and their unshakable belief in the value of choice. Far above the planet, Arden continued its journey. The probe carried the last words of a species that had vanished but refused to be forgotten. It traveled silently through the stars, ensuring that every civilization could hear, understand, and reflect. Humanity had disappeared, but its influence was growing stronger with every passing year. Talon looked at the stars and smiled. Humans had built more than machines and cities. They had built hope. And now, that hope would guide the galaxy. The message from Earth spread quietly but steadily across the galaxy. Civilizations that had long ignored one another now began to pause. Leaders and scholars studied the words of humans, trying to understand their meaning. The warning was clear and strong: you made this choice. Now face the consequences. Talon continued his research with great determination. He shared the recordings of Myra and the human projects with other scientists and leaders. Slowly, the influence of humans began to grow. Some leaders laughed at first, thinking the warning had no real power. Others grew uneasy, sensing a truth they had long avoided. They remembered past decisions that had caused conflict or harm, and the message from Earth forced them to think about responsibility. In the star system of Korra, a council of leaders gathered to discuss the Earth message. They reviewed the evidence Talon had collected. Machines, recordings, and archives showed humans had faced impossible dangers and yet acted with courage and thought. Korra's council realized that the humans had understood consequences far better than many civilizations had. They began to question their own choices. Meanwhile, other planets reacted differently. Some civilizations decided to ignore the warning, dismissing humans as weak and extinct. They continued their actions without reflection. But in systems where leaders listened carefully, old conflicts began to be reconsidered. Past disputes were paused, and negotiations reopened. The Earth message had become more than a warning. It had become a mirror, reflecting the consequences of pride, greed, and carelessness. Talon traveled to distant planets to share what he had learned. He met scholars, students, and leaders eager to understand. Many had never studied humans closely before. Now, they listened intently. Talon explained that humans had left more than warnings. They had left examples of courage, intelligence, and collaboration. He showed how humans had worked with allies across space, protecting knowledge and teaching lessons even in absence. The more Talon shared, the more the galaxy began to change. Leaders who had once ignored responsibility now felt accountable. Decisions that once seemed simple were carefully studied. Civilizations began to cooperate where before there had been suspicion. Humanity's voice, carried through Arden and the records, inspired reflection and action. On the planet Nero, Talon observed students learning from human records. Children studied the history of Earth and the technology humans had left behind. They learned about courage, fairness, and wisdom. For the first time, the young minds of the galaxy had role models who were no longer present but whose influence was strong. Talon smiled as he watched the next generation grow in understanding. Even among skeptics, the message began to resonate. Some leaders noticed patterns in their own history that mirrored the mistakes humans had warned against. Conflicts caused by pride, greed, and carelessness now seemed avoidable. The galaxy slowly realized that ignoring responsibility was dangerous. Humans had disappeared, yet they had shown that even the smallest species could teach the greatest lessons. Talon felt a mixture of pride and worry. Pride that humans had left such a lasting impact. Worry that some civilizations might still ignore the warning. He continued to travel, speak, and share. Every archive he opened, every recording he played, was a reminder of the importance of choice. He knew that understanding the message was only the beginning. Action would determine if the galaxy could avoid disaster. Arden continued to drift through space, silently carrying Earth's final message to distant worlds. The probe moved with purpose, touching star systems that had never heard of humans before. Every signal it sent reminded civilizations that choices had consequences. Humans had vanished, but their influence grew stronger with each passing moment. Across the galaxy, the reckoning began. Decisions were reviewed. Alliances were strengthened. Conflicts that had seemed inevitable were reconsidered. The voice of Earth acted as both teacher and guide. Leaders could no longer act without thinking of consequences, because the message reminded them that wisdom mattered more than pride or fear. Talon paused one evening on a quiet planet, looking at the stars. He imagined Earth as it had once been, full of life, full of sound, and full of determination. Humans had faced dangers far greater than many civilizations could imagine. Yet they had acted with courage and intelligence. They had sent their message knowing they might never be heard. Yet now, centuries later, the galaxy was listening. Talon knew the journey was only beginning. Humanity had shown the way, but the galaxy had to follow. The reckoning was not just about reflection. It was about change. Every civilization had to decide if it would heed the warning, take responsibility, and act wisely. The last voice of humans had become the guide that the galaxy needed. The stars stretched endlessly above. Arden moved silently through the void, carrying hope and wisdom. The reckoning had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same. Talon looked across the classroom on the planet Nero and saw rows of young students from many different worlds. Their eyes were wide with curiosity as they watched the holographic recording of Myra speaking from Earth centuries ago. She stood tall on a bright green plain, her voice calm but full of strength. The words were simple, yet their meaning reached deep into every mind. Think. Decide. Own it, Talon repeated to the students. These were the words humans had left behind on old inscriptions and in their recordings. They were more than words. They were instructions for living wisely. He explained how humans had faced danger, uncertainty, and even extinction, yet they had chosen courage and thought over fear and selfishness. The students listened intently. Some had grown up hearing stories of humans as clever but extinct beings. Now they saw humans as teachers, not myths. They learned about human technology, but more importantly, they learned about human values. Humans had believed in fairness, cooperation, and responsibility. Even long after they had vanished, their ideas had the power to guide civilizations across the stars. Talon guided them through stories of human achievements. He showed how humans had built cities that worked with nature, machines that saved lives instead of destroying them, and ships that explored space without seeking conquest. He explained the secret projects humans had left behind, systems designed to protect knowledge and warn others. The students were amazed that a species no longer alive could still teach so much. One student, a young alien named Lyra, raised her hand. "Teacher, how did humans know their message would reach us?" she asked. Talon smiled. "They could not know for certain," he said. "But they believed that every choice matters. They trusted that wisdom and courage could survive even in absence. That is why they sent Arden, the probe carrying their last words. Humans knew that ideas travel farther than bodies, and their lessons could reach those ready to listen." The students discussed among themselves how the message applied to their own lives. They shared stories from their home planets about conflicts, choices, and mistakes. Talon encouraged them to think critically about the consequences of every decision, no matter how small. He wanted them to understand that wisdom was not just learning facts, but applying knowledge with care and courage. Beyond the classroom, Talon saw change spreading across the galaxy. Leaders who had once ignored responsibility were now consulting human records before making decisions. Plans for conflicts were reconsidered, and new alliances formed. The message of Earth had become a guiding principle. Even skeptics who had once dismissed humans as extinct now studied their work, realizing that the strength of humanity lay not in power, but in thoughtfulness and courage. Talon often returned to the ruins of old human research stations. There he found inscriptions left by explorers and scientists, simple phrases meant to remind others of their values. Think. Decide. Own it. These words resonated with Talon as he guided others. They were reminders that choices had consequences, and that responsibility could never be avoided. Humans had trusted others to learn from these lessons, and now the galaxy was beginning to do so. One evening, Talon looked up at the stars and imagined the people of Earth. He pictured cities full of life, forests and oceans, and humans working together to understand the universe. He thought about how they had faced impossible challenges and had acted with courage and thought. Humans had believed that their knowledge and values could survive, even without them. And now, Talon realized, their belief was true. The students Talon taught were the first of many generations who would carry the lessons of humanity forward. Across the galaxy, children and young adults learned from the recordings of Myra and the designs humans had left behind. They learned that intelligence without responsibility was dangerous, but courage combined with thought could guide entire civilizations. Arden, the probe, continued its silent journey through space. Its sensors detected new star systems and sent the message of Earth to places humans had never reached. Every planet it passed received knowledge, inspiration, and a warning. The probe carried hope across light years, proving that even the smallest voice could echo across the universe. Talon felt a deep sense of pride and responsibility. Humans were gone, but their influence was stronger than ever. They had taught the galaxy to think, to act with care, and to take responsibility for every choice. The lessons were no longer confined to old archives or remote probes. They were alive in the minds of the young, ready to shape the future of the stars. He watched Lyra and the other students discussing the human message. He knew that one day, they would carry the lessons further, applying them in ways even humans could not imagine. Earth had left behind not just a warning, but a gift, courage, wisdom, and hope for the galaxy. Talon smiled as he looked at the stars stretching endlessly above. Humans were gone, but their voice continued to travel. The galaxy was learning. The message was alive. And the lessons of humanity were finally taking root. The galaxy was changing. Talon could feel it in the way leaders and scholars acted, in the way students debated, and in the way entire planets began to cooperate. The warning from Earth had traveled far, and it was no longer just words. It had become a guide, a test, and a reminder of responsibility. Talon traveled from system to system, meeting leaders who had once ignored warnings but now listened carefully. He shared the recordings of Myra and the records of human technology. The lessons were simple, yet powerful. Humans had shown that courage, thought, and fairness were stronger than fear or selfishness. They had taught that choices mattered and that every action had consequences. On the planet Virel, two rival leaders had prepared for a conflict that could have destroyed their planets. Both had powerful fleets, weapons, and long histories of mistrust. Yet, when Talon presented the human message, they paused. They watched the recordings of Myra speaking about cooperation and responsibility. Slowly, they began to discuss solutions that did not involve violence. They realized that the humans had acted with wisdom even when faced with great danger. If humans could think carefully under pressure, so could they. Elsewhere, in the star system of Alara, children studied human inscriptions in schools. Think. Decide. Own it, they repeated. The words had become part of their daily life. Teachers explained how humans had faced impossible odds and had chosen to act with courage and fairness. Students learned to think before acting, to consider the consequences, and to understand the power of their decisions. These lessons spread quickly, shaping a new generation of leaders, thinkers, and explorers. Talon observed the changes quietly. He realized that humans had left the galaxy more than a warning. They had left hope. Hope that civilizations could act wisely, hope that mistakes could be avoided, and hope that courage combined with intelligence could guide entire worlds. Humans had vanished, yet their voice continued to inspire, guide, and protect. Arden, the probe, continued its silent journey. It carried humanity's last words to systems that had never heard them before. Each signal it sent reminded civilizations that decisions could not be taken lightly. The probe's path touched planets, moons, and stations across the galaxy. Wherever it passed, curiosity and reflection followed. Humans had shown that influence could survive absence, that ideas could travel farther than ships, and that courage could echo across the stars. Talon often thought about the human projects he had discovered. They were not built for conquest but for protection and knowledge. Humans had designed machines to monitor threats, preserve information, and help civilizations avoid mistakes. Talon realized that these systems were not just tools. They were teachers, carrying the values of humanity across space. By following their guidance, civilizations began to act more thoughtfully. In the capital of the Galcian Council, leaders debated trade agreements, alliances, and disputes with a new mindset. They considered the long-term effects of their choices. Decisions were weighed carefully, with input from advisors who had studied the human message. Conflicts that once seemed inevitable were paused or redirected into peaceful solutions. Humans had not left armies, but they had left wisdom, and it was changing the galaxy. Even skeptics began to acknowledge the power of humanity's lessons. A group of traders on the planet Kira had once ignored warnings about resource management and fairness. Now, after learning from the records and observing changes in other systems, they revised their practices. They shared resources more fairly, settled disputes peacefully, and encouraged cooperation with neighbors. The human message had become a mirror, reflecting the right path for those willing to see it. Talon felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Humanity had achieved something remarkable. They had vanished, but their legacy was alive. Their courage, intelligence, and sense of responsibility had inspired change. The galaxy was beginning to act with care, wisdom, and thought. Every planet that listened became a part of a growing network of civilizations guided by the lessons humans had left behind. One quiet night, Talon stood on a hill under the light of distant stars. He thought about Earth, its oceans, forests, and cities that had once teemed with life. Humans had faced impossible dangers and had chosen to act with courage and fairness. They had sent Arden to deliver their final message, trusting that others could learn. And now, centuries later, the galaxy was listening. The turning point had arrived. Decisions were no longer made lightly. Leaders considered consequences, civilizations cooperated, and new ideas of fairness and responsibility spread across the stars. Humans had disappeared, yet they guided the galaxy in ways no one had expected. Their lessons had taken root, and the influence of their spirit could be felt everywhere. Talon smiled quietly. Humans had taught that courage was not just action, but thoughtfulness combined with wisdom. They had shown that influence could survive even absence. And now, the galaxy was proving that it had learned the most important lesson of all: choices mattered, and the consequences could shape the future. Above him, Erden drifted silently, carrying humanity's final message. Its journey was far from over. Every planet it reached, every mind it touched, added to the growing understanding. The turning point was just the beginning. The galaxy was learning, and the legacy of humanity would continue to guide it for generations to come. Centuries had passed since the first signal from Earth reached the galaxy. Talon, now older and wiser, looked at the stars and reflected on the changes that had taken place. What had started as curiosity and caution had grown into understanding and action. The human message had traveled farther than anyone could have imagined. It had touched civilizations on countless worlds and had shaped the decisions of leaders, scholars, and children alike. Everywhere Talon traveled, he could see the results of humanity's legacy. Star systems that had once been on the brink of war now shared resources, traded knowledge, and worked together to solve common challenges. Alliances were stronger, disputes were resolved through dialogue, and the focus on fairness and responsibility had become a guiding principle for entire planets. Humans had disappeared, yet their influence remained alive and growing. In a classroom on the planet Nero, young students from different civilizations studied Earth's history and technology. They learned about humans not just as explorers or inventors, but as teachers. The voice of Myra and other humans echoed through the recordings, teaching courage, thoughtfulness, and the importance of wise choices. Talon watched as the students discussed ideas, asked questions, and debated solutions to hypothetical problems. They were learning to think critically, to plan carefully, and to act responsibly. Humanity's lessons had become part of the galaxy's culture. Talon traveled to the ruins of old human stations on distant planets. He examined machines humans had built to preserve knowledge, protect systems, and help civilizations avoid mistakes. Even after centuries, these devices continued to operate, silently carrying the spirit of Earth across space. Talon realized that humans had designed their legacy with care, ensuring that their lessons would survive long after they were gone. Every blueprint, every message, and every recording was a guide for civilizations ready to listen. Arden, the probe, continued its journey through uncharted systems. Its mission remained the same, to carry the final words of humanity to every corner of the galaxy. Each planet it reached received guidance, wisdom, and inspiration. For some civilizations, the message was a warning. For others, it was a lesson in courage and cooperation. In every case, humans had left a gift, the understanding that choices mattered and that responsibility was the foundation of progress. Talon often reflected on the journey. Humans had faced impossible odds, yet they had acted with determination and foresight. They had understood that influence could survive even after a species disappeared. Their courage, intelligence, and moral strength had shaped not only their own world but the entire galaxy. Talon felt pride in being a part of this legacy, guiding others to see what humans had accomplished and teaching the lessons they had left behind. The galaxy had begun to change in ways no one could have predicted. Civilizations that had once been isolated now collaborated to explore space, protect shared resources, and learn from one another. Conflicts were no longer seen as inevitable. Decisions were weighed with care. Leaders and citizens alike had learned to reflect on the consequences of their actions. Humanity's voice had become a standard for wisdom and courage across the stars. One quiet night, Talon stood under the light of distant suns and imagined Earth in its prime. He thought of forests, oceans, mountains, and cities filled with life and energy. He pictured humans working together, solving problems, and teaching one another about responsibility and courage. Even though they no longer existed, their spirit lived on. They had not vanished in silence. They had left a lasting echo, a message that had transformed the galaxy. In every corner of space, the words of Myra and the inscriptions left by humans continued to inspire. Think. Decide. Own it. They had become a motto, a guiding principle, and a challenge to every civilization. The galaxy had learned to listen, to act wisely, and to face the consequences of every decision. Humans had taught that true strength was not in conquest or power, but in thoughtfulness, courage, and responsibility. Talon smiled as he looked at the stars. Humanity had done more than survive. They had influenced generations far beyond their own. Even absent, they had guided the galaxy toward understanding, cooperation, and wisdom. Their legacy was eternal, traveling through the stars, carried by Arden, remembered by scholars, and lived by the young minds of countless civilizations. The galaxy would never forget the message of Earth. Every choice would be considered. Every consequence understood. Humanity had shown that even in absence, a species could leave a mark that changed the future. Talon felt a sense of peace and wonder. Humans had made the ultimate contribution to the galaxy. They had shown that courage, wisdom, and responsibility could endure beyond life, time, and distance. Above him, Erden drifted silently, a reminder that humanity's final words still traveled across space. The echo of Earth's message would continue, inspiring and guiding civilizations for centuries to come. Humanity had vanished, but its spirit had become eternal. The galaxy had listened. The galaxy had learned. The galaxy had changed. And somewhere, in the light of distant stars, Talon whispered quietly to himself, "They made the choice to teach, even as they left. Now the galaxy listens."